Hi, I'm here with Frank Teruel, CEO of Arkose Labs, and we'll be discussing the rise of AI agents in cybersecurity, what they are, why they matter, and how they're changing the security landscape for businesses and everyday users.
It's interesting. I actually am speaking at a conference today on this exact issue on kind of the evolution from, adversarial attacks and traditional methods to how, Gen AI is affecting the speed at which attacks proliferate. And now, more importantly, if you think of kind of the dynamism in that space and the changes that are coming so quickly, how agentic agents, which, define them, let's you and I define them very simply as software entities that are doing things on behalf of Frank or Anna that are authorized, right? They have intent, they can make decisions, they can reason, they operate without any oversight, and presumably they operate around some guardrails. We've said, hey, an example might be you're my payment agent. And I want this agent to go out there and make payments on my behalf or find utilities that are better than what I'm paying today, those kinds of things. So it's an interesting shift because it changes the conversation from the parameters from an identity perspective of is Frank really Frank and is Frank behaving normally in the context of this transaction? That's always been the underlying premise of every online transaction. It's changing it to is Frank really Frank or is this an authorized agent of Frank? And what is it doing? And is that activity authorized? Does it make sense? Is it contextual? Those kinds of things. So fascinating world. But I think I start with the fundamental premise for everybody that at the end of the day, imagine these things as, authorized, empowered software assistants that do things on behalf of Frank, independent of Frank. I write them, I sign up for them, I use them, and then they go do the things I've asked them to do. Presumably, they do the things I ask them to do. That's the key. So what an interesting time for sure as an industry.
Okay, so why is this important to like everyday user? What are some real risks, real world consequences that can arise if these agents are left unchecked?
Sure. Well, look, but first of all, from an opportunity perspective, it's fantastic for consumers. Legitimate agents transacting and doing things on our behalf are incredible productivity tools. They're going to find us deals. Imagine, Anna, that I go, hey, I want to fly to Spain. I've got a conference in Spain on this date. Go find me the best hotel airline package, irrespective of airlines, or find me the best hotel airline package on American or United or whatever airline you travel. And then it goes out and does its thing. So from a productivity perspective, it's absolutely an incredible evolution for the end users. From a risk perspective, it creates an incredible challenge for the company. And that challenge is most companies today have mitigation around bots, right? And these things are independent software programs running. And they would say, I have an interaction happening on the website. They'll look at the device, they'll root canal the credential. They'll say, this is Frank, this is a human being. But many of the companies today have mitigations that basically say, I'm going to stop bot activity. This is a bot, this is a software script. I'm going to stop it and not move forward. So it creates two challenges. Challenge number one is the authorized user has a software running on his or her behalf, and that's now being stopped. That immediately equates to market share. The agents are not, they don't get angry, they're indiscriminate, they'll just go somewhere else and get the best ticket, right? So you have a potential market share problem or transaction abandonment problem when you stop the agent. On the other hand, if you let an agent in that's an illegitimate agent, right? Imagine the brain damage associated with this. So that's the real risk is the agent operating within the instructed, guardrails? Is it a legitimate agent operating for Frank? Or is it a legitimate agent who made a mistake? Imagine a payment agent who goes in and pays the wrong amount to the wrong person. And now you go, who's liable and responsible for that payment flow? Or is it a nefarious agent that's trying to hurt the end user? So what really happens is your methodology for identifying interactions with your company has to evolve to include all of the above, right? If Frank is still Frank, great. Frank's operating in the context of this transaction, fantastic. Let Frank through. Is this one of Frank's agents? How? What's the mechanism by which we authorize these agents to make sure that that agent's associated with a real persona, and so that's legitimate. Hey, what about this potential agent is bad? And if so, how do we stop it? And not just stop it, in between, if we see some risk, how do we challenge the agent? Right? How do we say, hey, wait a minute, there's something weird about this interaction. I'm going to have some risk-based challenges with the agent. Now that's particularly tricky, Anna, because these agents learn in real time, right? And they reason. One study I saw was very interesting, where it said they ran a study and they said 100%. We'll send you this attribution, by the way, but 100% of a traditional CAPTCHA was solved almost in real time by these agents. I mean, because they learned any reason they're able to do it. So that methodology for how do I expand the aperture for identity verification to ensure that I'm covering all of the above is going to be really important. And if you don't do it right, it creates either abandonment risk and market share loss, or it creates real false negatives where you have, bad agents operating within your ecosystem causing real problems.
You said you have observed like bad actors deploying persistent AI agents that can maintain fake identities for weeks before
Oh yeah.
strike.
Yeah.
So in that case, like, would you walk us through like what these campaigns look like in practice?
Yeah, yeah. If patience is a virtue, AI agents are virtuous, right? Because they're under no constraints, and especially the nefarious ones. If you have an agent, for example, that's constrained, like I said earlier, by please find me a flight to Spain within these date frames because I'm at a conference, it's going to operate within those guidelines. But nefarious agents are very patient. You can design an agent to say create a drumbeat of regular transactions to so that you become trusted. This, by the way, if you think of industries, by the way, Arkose has a great purview of all industries because we operate and protect the world's largest consumer-facing brand. So we're able to see activity across, banking and travel and dating and gaming, technology, and so forth and social. So just imagine that maybe it's a dating site. And as you know, the biggest issue with dating is either Bitcoin scams or pig butchering, right? Where they create a persona, they create a relationship. Agents can be immensely patient. And you could program an agent to say, over the course of time, just begin to build a relationship, or maybe on a payment side, make legitimate transactions. And what that does is it begins to create a reputation and an element of trust in that agent, when in fact the thing could be nefarious and it's just being patient. So I think that's the thing to think about. The key that we're seeing in agents is they act like humans. They're very deliberate, and that makes them very tricky to mitigate because they're not a drive-by. They're going to be very patient and they're going to operate to whatever the opportunity is. And I think that's the key.
And so also companies are increasingly deploying their own AI agents for customer
Yeah.
service or transactions, even compliance. What risks arise when organizations lack robust protocols to verify that their own automated systems are behaving correctly?
Yeah, again, this is interesting, Anna. We see this a lot. We have the privilege also of having within our customer base some of these AI companies. So we work with AI to help create mitigation against AI. And really, the challenge you face as a company is if you over-index one way on the agents, then the issue becomes what are you doing to make sure they don't get compromised? If you don't adopt the agents, two things are happening. You're losing the productivity gains associated with an agent environment, and at the same time, you're facing an adversary who has no such constraints. They're early adopters and quick adopters of technology. So I think those two things are in play. I think again, the issue is if I create agents within my platform, the risk of hijack is the issue. Have they been hijacked? Is something happening? Are they operating within the guardrails? I think those are important constraints. Are they doing what's intended? And then the other thing to think about, it's very interesting. We're starting to see the idea that human beings mimic agents because they know that maybe the rigor around agent interactions is not the same. So fraudsters mimicking agent activity to get into these things. So I think as companies deploy these things across their ecosystem, again, there's enormous productivity enhancements and gains associated with it, but there's also the risk of saying, okay, is there a vulnerability in these agents? Are they operating the way they should be operating? And if they are, great. And if not, how do I ensure? One of the things we talk about as you build an agent ecosystem is the idea of detect and monitor. How do you continuously monitor what these things are doing to make sure that they're operating in a contextual manner that's not unusual?
And you also mentioned the Know Your AI Agent idea, so framework analogous to Know Your Customer, right? KYC. So what would such a framework involve and how might it help financial institutions and other sectors adapt?
Yeah, I think if you start to think of the deployment, like every other software, there's going to be platforms, and they are today. They're already out there from the big providers, and so your agents. They have a definitive, they come from a platform that's legitimate that you can trust, and so forth. And so the idea is, as I think about the aperture of identity verification being broader, know your customer is important, but again, know your agent's important. Those agents are going to do activities that like a customer would do. And so understanding, is this an agent that derived from what source? What's his point of origin? Is this a known agent from a platform? Is this an open source agent no one's ever seen before, right? Because as you know, as these as these AI agents become open source, less controlled, that's where the real risk is, right? And so understanding, know your agent, where did it come from? How is it operating? Where have I seen it before? Have I seen it before? Is the reputational elements it's built up, are they legitimate reputational elements, or was it three good ones and then they took off with the money, right? That kind of thing. So it's a very interesting notion, and we've really focused as a company to go within our customer base to say it's critical that you begin to develop an understanding of opening that aperture and identifying all these interactions. Because again, the ultimate friction you can imagine is maybe I've got that same travel agentic agent working on my behalf, and the airline rejects it and goes, no, I'm not going to do it. And then what happens is they just lost my ticket because the agent's going to find it somewhere else. What's interesting, for example, in that context, Anna, we have airlines obviously within our portfolio. 71% of them understand that they're way behind the curve on AI in general, and so grappling with that's going to be a problem to them. To many airlines, a bot equals scraping. Scraping equals competitive people scraping prices or grabbing up seats or inventory hoarding. And so there's a predisposition to be maybe a little bit antagonistic towards an agent interaction, right? And so I think that's something you have to think about is to say, hey, wait a minute, this could be a legitimate extension of Frank or Anna trying to buy a ticket for the conference. And if I don't do it, my competitor is going to get that ticket. So I think that's the interesting issue is we see this evolve, grappling with understanding its point of origin, how it behaves, continuous monitoring, and then where to, again, the point of origin is so important. Is it something we've never seen before? If so, challenge it, right? And we're privileged in our company to be able to do that. We've been working with AI a long time, using AI to mitigate AI attacks, adversarial AI attacks. And as you work with these platforms and understand how they work, we're able to do things like we call AI poisoning, when you challenge something that's competitive, that's rigorous enough that the agent itself takes too much time to figure it out. That's a mitigation as well. So I think that's important. But again, the airlines are a great poster child for this because their predisposition is, uh-oh, scraping, right? And in fact, it could be a legitimate agent trying to book a better ticket for Frank.
And so, do you see regulations similar to KYC requirements in banking emerging around AI agent verification, or will this remain primarily industry-driven effort?
I think it'll be a bit of both, candidly. I think in reality, though, the industry has to drive it. As you and I know, governments are always so behind on everything that if you wait for regulation, then that ship has sailed. I mean, it's going to be too late. And what happens with governments is eventually when the pain point gets big enough, they try to regulate it, right? And so I think this really is an industry-led initiative. It'll be supported by regulation and public policy. I think that's important. But ultimately, industries need to lead it. And I think you'll find probably kind of a variation of responses within industries. I imagine, for example, that banks will be much more rigorous than perhaps gaming companies would or socials would. So I think you'll see that even within certain industries, those cohorts probably will lead the charge on regulation more than the government will, and or within standardization, I should say, then the government will catch up with regulation. But I do think at the speed at which this stuff proliferating, I live in California, so if this were an earthquake, a regular AI earthquake's 3.0 on the Richter scale, and agentic's an 8. I mean, it's just absolutely a tectonic shift. And so when you think it that way, I think industries will be self-served based on the risk and based on the reward. Obviously, banks are where the money are. Banks and brokerages and those kind of financial institutions are going to be much more rigorous, I imagine, than maybe somebody in a different industry. But I think it's a very good question on it. It'll be interesting. It's important for industries like the industry leaders like Arkose to have a say and to really help with our customers begin to guide where the market goes, and then regulation will catch up. I think that's the way it'll play out.
So maybe as a last question, like looking ahead, what should CISOs and security teams prioritize today to prepare for this new class of AI-driven threats, I guess?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I'm gonna bifurcate the question and come back with a couple of responses. So, in some industries, like the airline industry I just talked about, they're way behind the curve, and they understand that they don't have the internal expertise to handle this. They don't. That's not what they do. Their security teams are not focused around that. In the airline industry, for example, where you see a real challenge is imagine these agents linking loyalty programs, right? Loyalty programs is a huge problem in airline industries because you've got all these points sitting on your app and call the flying you're doing, and the airlines are trying to get those points off the balance sheet because they're a liability, and so they go, great. You know what you can do? You can link this to a hotel and use your points to buy a hotel room, things like that. Imagine agents, nefarious agents that go around linking, taking over accounts and linking it and monetizing those loyalty programs. That's digital currency. It's a form of cash that can be monetized downstream for either gifts or events or those kinds of things. So I think in those kinds of industries where airlines go, wow, we're really unprepared, that the message to the CISO is you got to really work with your supply chain partners to understand the risk and really prepare yourself for the reality that these things are already coming. This is not a 3 or 4 year thing. They're already out there. They're being built. I think the next evolution that's going to be scary is the open source ones. What happens when open source or agents from antagonistic nations or states that don't like us, start putting agents out there? I think that's the evolution. So, lean on your supply chain partners, understand the risk. For all of it, the second part of the answer for all CISOs, irrespective of industry, I think redefining with you and your fraud teams and all of your onboarding teams, digital omni-channel digital consumer teams, understanding how the aperture needs to open to address this new method of interaction. Because if you over-index one way or the other, too much friction, the agent's going somewhere else. Not enough challenge from a risk perspective, you're going to have really increased in fraud and losses. So I think for all of them, define that. How do I define and monitor it? How do I categorize it? How do I understand it? How do I determine its point of origin? How do I associate that agent with a known digital persona? And I think that requires, again, leaning on your supply chain. It requires an understanding that this stuff's coming quickly and begin to prepare yourself, for that eventuality. And then, like any other good CISO, we've worn these hats. What are the highest points of vulnerability? Right?
Mhm.
I'll give you an example that's very interesting, Anna. So, phishing as a service is a big thing right now. If you've seen this, there's phish kits everywhere. I was speaking to a bank a while ago, and we were talking about the reality of their fight. And by the way, they were kind of a leading actor in phishing as a service mitigation because they at least knew it was out there.
Yeah.
And the CISO was telling me that he said, "Hey, it's whack-a-mole. These things, we find a fishlet, a phish kit." It mimics the bank. It's, as you know, they're designed for MFA compromise. And he goes, we try to take it down, and within minutes there's a new one up. Well, how does that happen? That's because these phishing as a service or crime as a service platforms are using AI to generate more fishlets. And so I think understanding what are the points of vulnerability and what are the latest attack vectors that are likely to be attacked first is a good way to marshal resources to go there because obviously you can't boil the ocean, so it's going to be important to focus on those points. But yeah, I think it's look, great time to be a CISO, exciting time to be a CISO, and exciting time for the industry. But I think it's as I started the conversation, a fantastic evolution in productivity for consumers and what we can do through these agents a really interesting moment for industry to step up and realize how do we open the aperture on how we identify these things, understand and quantify our potential risk, harden those targets, and then lean on my supply chain partners, especially those that are in the AI world, on creating mitigations that make sense. Because as you and I know, Anna, they're already here. And they're just not here in force, but they'll be here in force quick. And I think preparing for that's going to be really interesting.
Okay, thank you. It was a very insightful conversation. Thank you so much, Frank.
No, no, I really enjoyed it.